What does minimalism mean? It's often used as a buzzword in things like modern art, television, film, and every once in a while animation. But for some, minimalism is shorthand for nothingness. So what does it mean? Well, welcome to Samurai Jack. I was recently rewatching the series for the first time since its initial run, and rewatching it now, it's impossible not to be impressed with how beautifully the show combines bombastic, pulsing action with the absolute most picturesque moments of what seems on the surface like nothing.
Yes, sir. Working here is much more peaceful than being at home with Didi.
When Genndy Tartakovsky finished his work on Dexter's Laboratory, he wanted to create something new. He walked into the Cartoon Network offices, into a pitch meeting, and said, "Hey, remember David Carradine in Kung Fu? Wasn't that cool?" Yep. This was what inspired the idea for what would from there become one of the most stylistically resonant shows of the past 2 decades. Samurai Jack was born.
What do you think of that, Mr. Pajama-wearing, basket-faced, slipper-wielding, Clyde Fleet-buckled, gather-up and blatant maw-bleedering gomeral, Jesse-off-looking stunner?
While narratively the show ended up being much more thematically inspired by the Frank Miller graphic novel Ronin, Samurai Jack took the art of animation seriously, and it shows in first how it was animated. You might have noticed that this looks a bit like a painting. That's because it was. Genndy wanted the show to use a very minimalistic art style, and he was inspired, surprisingly, by 1950s Disney films. The minimal line work, the open paint aesthetic. Yeah, I'm willing to bet you didn't think this would lead to this.
I would like to place an order for delivery. 30 minutes, oh, it's free. Excellent!
But it did, and this was accomplished by hand-drawing every frame, but the team took the handcrafted mantra a bit further. These beautiful backgrounds were often spray-painted and stenciled to give them a brushed look before they hit your television screens. But even more unique is how Genndy and his team took that minimalism a step further into framing. This is a scene from the 1974 film Longest Yard, and this is a page from the Frank Miller graphic novel 300. They have next to nothing in common, until Jack mashed them together. Cinematography is so important, framing is equally so, and animation often ignores these realities, yet Samurai Jack revels in them. Taking cues from classics like Ben-Hur and manipulating the split screens of films like Longest Yard, Genndy plays with small frames, multiple frames, wide shots, unique angles. He treats his work like it's being filmed, and it works spectacularly well. It gives us moments like these, and moments where your TV is turned into a portal for your focus on the smallest square imaginable, forcing you to pay attention to exactly where Genndy and the team wants your eyes. This often contrasts directly with the 300-inspired action, that take up your whole screen, 60 poses in 5 seconds action. This is Jack and the Spartans, an homage to Frank Miller's 300. If this isn't the equivalent of that comic brought to life, I'm not sure what is. Yet, this minimalism found a home in some of the riskier, more idiosyncratic episodes of the show. Samurai Jack finds comfort more often than not in visual storytelling. It almost always prioritizes showing instead of shouting. In a 2003 behind-the-scenes featurette, Genndy would say that the staff didn't really have writers or even scripts, and instead it was the board artist that dictated the action. And while he may not have meant that literally, the approach is clear in the results. Very little of the show is about voices. It's almost always guiding you with your eyes. In Jack and the Haunted House, you discover the story of the house's occupants not through dialogue, but through flashbacks that utilize a one-episode-only animation style that's literally just line work. Yet you get their entire backstory that way. In Seasons of Death, we get to know this character who never speaks a word intimately. We know how he lives, his isolation, his demeanor, and his plot to poison Jack all through visual narrative. And yet it's moments where this approach meets the show thematically that make for something truly special. Take the very first episode of Season 4. Jack is followed by an assassin, and eventually it leads to this wordless fight. A fight that plays with your eyes as the hope of Jack, represented with the color white, and the darkness of Aku combine to create this visual spectacle. All black, all white, no words. The simplicity of good versus evil. But the stripped down approach to the animation style and the narrative, the dialogue, only worked because the show knew how to indulge itself in between those moments. In the 11th episode of Season 2, Jack falls down a rabbit hole after his clothes are stolen and finds a strange, hyper-futuristic play on Wonderland. In Jack and the Slapback, he's thrust into a Gladiator Mad Max Thunderdome parody, in which he has to fight off obvious references to wrestlers like Macho Man Randy Savage here in order to make it out of the arena alive, and there's even an episode that plays directly on My Neighbor Totoro. By the time Season 5 would finally roll around and make its way to Adult Swim, that visual and brutal indulgence would be amped up a dozen notches. But before that 5th season would ever even start production, all of this would come together in what may be the show's magnum opus, The Three Blind Archers. This episode has next to no dialogue. In fact, for minutes at a time, it is deafeningly silent. Through nothing but a look, we learn that the episode's antagonists can't see. A visual cue given in a single moment, but one that lays the premise for the entire episode out, and one that Genndy trusted audiences were smart enough to catch. And as the episode plays with visual moments like these, the silence gives us, the viewer, a chance to do something that most animation doesn't allow us to do. It gives us a moment to immerse ourselves. It gives us the time to understand the tension, the landscape, the threat. And then it goes black. As Jack slowly acclimates to the sounds around him as opposed to the visuals. This episode strips the principles of modern animated shows down to its very core. No words, no sound, just dangerous beauty. The episode asks you to stop being a passive viewer and engage with the show. Deduce and understand the same things as Jack without the typical, "Oh look, they're blind, what do I do?" commentary from the protagonist. You and Jack are getting the same information through the same means. Minimalism doesn't mean less color. It doesn't mean fewer shapes. It isn't a representation of nothingness. Sometimes, as is the case in The Three Blind Archers, it's about giving someone only what's essential, only what they need to feel, and dropping the pomp and circumstance. It's the moment where a snowflake touching the ground tells you a samurai has found his advantage. Samurai Jack is almost impossibly beautiful. It doesn't care about how much dialogue you want. It doesn't care about how quickly you want Jack's story to move. It cares only about bridging the gap between near silent artistry and nuclear action. It was just a few months ago that I found myself wondering how Marvel would top the spectacle of Infinity War. What crazy fight could they stage? What convoluted plot would hold my attention the way it did the first time around? And surprisingly, it was Genndy Tartakovsky and this guy that would bring that thought to its knees. Maybe the best art is the kind that doesn't need to scream how great it is from the top of its explosions. Maybe the best animation isn't the most detailed. Maybe the best blockbuster isn't the one that forces you to type Transformers ending explained into Google on the drive home. Maybe modern media could learn a thing or two from Samurai Jack. But you won't hear him shouting that from the top of his ensemble film because he knows less really can be more. That is a wrap on today's episode of Nerdstalgic. If you enjoyed the video and want to see more stuff like Samurai Jack on the channel, press the like button. Also, if you haven't yet, press subscribe. That'll make sure you don't miss any episodes of Nerdstalgic. Also, hit the little bell next to the subscribe button. That'll make sure you're actually notified when I upload to this channel. So hit subscribe and the little bell. That way you'll never miss any uploads. And on your screen now are 2 more episodes of Nerdstalgic. You can click on either of those to, well, watch more from this channel. And I'll see you guys in the next video.